Morning people, welcome back to F Politics. Today, Trade Secretary Kemi Badenoch, she reminded us all that the Tories are still really bad at maths. Now, while I'm not a huge fan of Trevor Phillips, the presenter, I did like the way he introduced this story.
I worked for an editor who would often look at a story I proposed and say, "But Trevor, will it change the price of cheese?" By which he meant, would anyone who wasn't obsessed with politics give a toss? Well, this week, the metaphor became a reality after the government called off trade talks with Canada. The upshot being that British cheese will become more expensive and harder to export.
Now, because the EU has a trade deal with Canada called CETA, we had a trade deal with Canada. And since Brexit, we agreed temporarily with Canada that we'd continue on the EU's terms until December just gone. Which is why UK industries were warning last year that there would be economic damage if we let the time run out. And now that it has, there's a 245% tariff on all cheese that we try to sell to Canada. It's also called into question our ability to sell cars to Canada free of charge. And these sorts of things have a ripple effect on jobs and cash flow here in the UK. Now first, let's look at Kemi Badenoch's excuse for this.
I did not think that the offer which they were putting forward was going to be right for agriculture in the UK.
Now what she's referring to there is that Canada wanted to be able to sell beef that had been artificially enlarged through hormones to the UK. Now alongside the ethical concerns, it would also make life harder for UK producers in terms of their ability to compete. But the EU, on the other hand, was able to maintain its ban on hormone beef and still have a trade deal with Canada. So given that the theme of this week is "I fucking told you so," here's me in July 2018. There's also the fact that the bigger the market that you have to offer, the more leverage you've got in trade negotiations, so Brexit literally weakens us by about 6 times. But here's how she tries to downplay the damage that this failure has done to our economy.
And we still have a second free trade agreement with Canada under the CPTPP.
Now here's where the maths comes in. The CPTPP is a trade agreement for countries that are mainly based around the Pacific Ocean because those countries understand that it makes sense to have trade agreements with countries that are physically close to you. And Canada is one of the countries in that agreement. And so Kemi Badenoch's argument is that because we're about to join the CPTPP, losing the trade deal that we had with Canada via the EU won't hurt us as much because we already have free trade with them. The problem with that is, according to the government's own assessment, joining the CPTPP will only add about 0.04% to our economy. And that covers trade with 11 countries, most of whom the EU already has free trade deals with. And so I did some research and found that in 2018, research commissioned by the UK government showed that if the UK stayed inside the EU's agreement with Canada, it would improve our economy by 0.032%, which means we got roughly the same amount of benefit from the EU's deal with one country as the government managed to get from a deal with 11 countries. And that's because the EU's deal with Canada is more comprehensive. It includes things like the mutual recognition of qualifications so that people and businesses can operate in each other's countries without having to get certified again. Which is why her next argument is even more stupid.
And our economy is 70 to 80% services. We are not a goods-based economy, and that means that the deals which we sign need to reflect the nature of the UK economy.
Do you mean like a deal that allows British architects to be able to work in Canada like qualified professionals? Because the EU has that. And then we get the usual argument of,
our economy is growing faster than Germany and France and other EU countries.
We've had basically zero growth consistently, and in terms of the cost of living, our inflation is higher than Germany, Italy, and France. Not to mention the guy they put in charge of the economy, Jeremy Hunt, said that our economy would be growing faster if not for Brexit, with the official experts saying it would be a 4% boost long term. Again, maths. Because every time you hear the Tories say, "Oh, but Germany's doing so badly," or "France is doing so badly," you have to think about it. Unless they can argue that somehow Germany having free trade access to all of its neighbors is the reason why it's doing badly, their argument has zero logic at all. Because without logic, all you've got left is taking pleasure in the suffering of German people, even though you know that it's making British people suffer more. Which tells you all you need to know about the kind of mentality that these people are working with. I'm Femi, make sure you follow F Politics so politics doesn't F you. Have a great week.